welcome to CEC Gurukul lecture. In continuation with the series on sociology of kinship, in today's lecture, we're going to discuss on women and kinship. Now, in order to understand the relationship, there will be a kind of lot of work on the same topic. But in this topic, we are going to talk with reference to Leela Dube's work, Women and Kinship, a comparative perspective. Here in this text, she is trying to look into the ways in which kinship kind of leads to a differentiation in the status of women in the different kinship system. So she is going to do a number of research in South Asia and Southeast Asia and tries to understand the difference in group membership, inheritance, economic status of women, and also resource allocation. So when we were trying to understand the group membership in a patrilineal society, the understanding is that women have a temporary membership and men have permanent membership. Now, because of the temporary identity or the membership, the fact that women are supposed to be sent off to another house, the property is kept with the agnatic group. Now, the Mitakshara law or rules of property is governs the Hindu patrilineal society in South Asia, where all male members are by birth co-partners. So, co-partnery is joint ownership of the property, and in this the women do not have any share in the property. Now, women were kind of given maintenance right, and in that maintenance right they were given gifts and other movable property, which kind of is termed as dowry, and dowry was seen as a share in the patrimonial property of the father. Now, the idea in which the property rights of women are either guaranteed also depends on the religion. So, there are differences across in Hindu, Islamic and Christian society. So, if we look into the property right among the Christians, a daughter is entitled to share equal to her sons, but there are many regional variations. So, in Travancore, the Cochin area with high population of Syrian Christian, the Travancore Christian Succession Act 1916 gave a daughter only 1/4 of son's share or rupees 5,000, whichever was less. Now, this law was kind of critiqued and because of the unequal, inegalitarian nature, and it was kind of annulled by the Supreme Court as being unconstitutional. So, dowry is considered as many a time as a right to property, but this is not kind of something comparable to the share in the father's property, because one, dowry would be in terms of the movable property, jewelry or any cash, whereas the inheritance is largely on the immovable property, that is land. So, the idea is that whether they have a share in the right to property or not, women are on the margin. A community that has been following its own rules and regulations of inheritance among the Christians community is the Goa Christians. According to the law applied to the converted Catholics of Goa from 16th to 19th century, a daughter was entitled to inherit her father's property along with her brothers. So, there is a kind of equal distribution of property. A widow, however, had the right only to maintenance from the husband's estate. But daughter's right to inheritance contravened with the patrilineal norms of inheritance, and as a result, not all women have been able to get a right in it. The law was changed by the Portuguese, and this is kind of more tilted towards the patrilineal law, and this is what is continued. According to the amended law, daughters had right to inherit, but they can be given dowry or trousseau instead. In theory, dowry could be movable or immovable property, but in practice, women generally got the movable property, because in case they were given the immovable property, it would lead to kind of conflict and fragmentation of the land. So, land is a major component of the immovable property, which continues in the male line, and this is to avoid fragmentation, because the women would be married off and you would have to move away from the land of the natal family, and therefore it would lead to dividing the land. In absence of son, the marriage of daughter with son of father's brother is looked upon. So this is a case of cross cousin or a marriage within the familial group in order to avoid land being divided. However, marriage with close kin was required a special permission from the church, but this was kind of a step taken to ensure that the land was retained with the group by birth. The legal right versus customary practice. Here we look into the Muslim community, and this is the Muslims of patrilineal South India has deviated from Quranic rules of inheritance. Daughters are completely deprived of their shares in the father's property in the interest of keeping the patrimony intact. If the daughter claims her right, it leads to dispute with her brother, and hence in general women avoid taking claim. This is also the case in Hindu patrilineal society. Though the Property Act has been amended and daughters are given a share in the father's acquired property, much of the North India women do not stake claim in the property because it could kind of lead to a conflict with the brother, and that would not be kind of desired, because it could stop her regular visits and also in terms of the gifts that she claims from her natal family. So in rural Bangladesh, women neither claim nor get the legal right to paternal property. So it's a customary practice that women do not claim the right to paternal property. Daughters notionally exchange their legal rights with the customary practice of receiving gifts and visiting their natal home. So the customary practice is more preferred than the legal right. The practice of periodically going home is known as neor, which connotes warmth, care, absence of critical eyes, and so on. So the gendered ideology or the stereotype of the women being as kind of desiring protection, requiring a lot of warmth and care from her natal family is retained on the ground that she would give up her stake in the legal rights of the property. Married daughters' right to share in immovable property is not acceptable owing to the physical distance and seclusion. So see, the belief in a patrilineal society is of exogamous marriage. So most of the time the daughters are married off to another village, to a kind of a distant off place. So the monitoring or the taking care of the land would not be possible because of the physical distance. And second, the gender ideology of women maintaining seclusion and the norms of wheeling, restriction on mobility also denies them the right to take care of landed property. In patrilineal South Asia, a daughter's right to stipulated share in land is unhonored. So land is basically considered as masculine. The exception to the rule is the matrilineal Muslims of Lakshadweep. Now, Lakshadweep has more of a bilateral kinship, which is more egalitarian, and when it comes to the property right, it is kind of different. Here, both male and female have inalienable rights in property of Tarawad. Now, the Tarawad is the joint property of the matrilineal group, in which both men and women have rights. The Tarawad is a property which is passed down to children through the female line because it's a matrilineal society, and the female members are permanent members of the Tarawad groups, while male members enjoy their share only as long as they live. Tarawad property has been traditionally considered as impartiable, although it may be divided for usufruct, that is the legal right for using someone else's property. As long as you have access to it, you will use it, but it's a temporary right, and it kind of also gives the person the right to enjoy the profit made from that property. There are kind of two kinds of property in a matrilineal society. One is the collective of the community, that is the Tarawad, which is the group female property. The other form of property is the individual property, which is governed by the Islamic law. Men gift their individual property to children and wife, they tend to deviate from Islamic law under the influence of matrilineal values. So Islamic law would say to give it equally among men and women, but the more of them are interested in giving it to the daughters, so as to, again, in a matrilineal society, the collective group belongs to the female, so it does not want to get defragmented and go to the male members. In most cases, both sons and daughters get equal share of disposable property rather than the share in the ratio 2:1. There is also the tendency to convert individual property into collective indisposable property to avoid fragmentation. In a matrilineal society, giving the property, whether it's individual or collective, to the son would imply fragmentation. So it is avoided. In Peninsular Malaysia, Adat, A-D-A-T, is a regional term for the customary laws. It requires that property is divided equally among sons and daughters, while the Islamic law, that is Sharia, talks about dividing the property in the ratio 2:1, and here the sons are getting almost double the share of the daughter. The preference is in the Lakshadweep and among the Islamic community is to follow Adat rather than the Sharia law, as the former is more egalitarian towards female. However, among the upper class, there is a tendency to choose the Islamic law, though not strictly applied. Shares are equally owned, which is keeping with both Sharia and Adat. So now we go to the bilateral Javanese society. The Islamic division of property is less acceptable than the Adat pattern of equal share. So there is no conflict in Islam in the notion of individual property. Property rules in bilateral society. We know that there are different kinds of property. It could be a community property, it could be an individual property, and these property are conceptually classified separately. And in a bilateral society, the children get shares of property from both mother and father, and this division of property is done at an early age. Now, say Malaysia and Indonesia, this agricultural land is inherited by both children of daughters and son. Daughters given land on marriage, when the practice is to give lands to daughters, the husband are only sharecroppers. That is, they don't have any right of ownership. They just have right to kind of till the land or be a sharecropper. Now, after looking into the inheritance of the property, we will also look into the allocation of resources. In South Asia, a woman's right to property and resource during an extant marriage is ineffective and non-existent. In principle, she has control over her household resources, is giver of food, the caretaker of responsible for the ritual and for perpetuating the tradition of the family. She has control over the jewelry and other financial resources of the household. In some communities, women have full control over the Stridhan. Now, Stridhan is the gifts and movable property which is given to the daughters at the time of marriage. And it is culturally believed that Stridhan is her property, though in practice it is kind of often does not belong to the women. It is taken over by the in-laws family. So, the Stridhan is basically the right to maintenance. The household is kind of a place where the resource allocations takes place, and if we kind of look into the gender division, then the household is a domestic place where the women are considered to be dominating. It is women's domain of power, and in Southeast Asia, they enjoy high status in terms of control over the economic resources. They are free of the feeling of dependence that a wife in South Asia harbors. So, in South Asia, which is patrilineal, though the domestic space belongs to the women, but she is an dependent individual. She doesn't have her agency and bargaining powers. So, she would have to kind of go by the terms and dictate of the male patriarch. This is completely different in Southeast Asia, where women are the actual owners of power and decision making in Southeast Asia. In South Asia, even the working women do not have control over the resources or their own earning. In practice, they might have control over the income, but in terms of the ideology, they are still dependent. They are reminded that they live in the house of the in-laws and they eat their food. So though you are an earning member, but that earning is kind of not sufficient for your bargaining power or your self of independence, because you have the cultural belief is that you have been sent to this, you an added burden, and therefore you kind of your earning is not sufficient for the maintenance of the entire family. It is only after she becomes a widow that a South Asian woman is entitled to a share of her husband's resources. She may inherit part of his self-acquired intestate property along with her sons and daughters. And even when we look into the contemporary workplace structure, organizational structure, we know the employees' social security benefit like the provident fund, the gratuity and so on are paid to the widow. However, if this cash is transferred into land, then it is kind of still the cultural ideological stake is that land as is a male form of property, and it is only the sons of the who are actually kind of considered as the true inheritor of the property. In South Asia, much of economically valuable work is done by women. It remains invisible. So the gender stereotype is that the male is the breadwinner. So in case the woman is doing some kind of economic work outside, she is doing it for the well-being of the family, and it kind of does not have the same economic value as their male counterpart. So we see that women in South Asia are engaged in agricultural labor, poultry, craft and so on, yet her economic contribution is undervalued. In the rural areas of India and Nepal, women of the poorer section work in the field as wage laborer and they render services to the upper class women. At the lower level, parda or veiling does not prevent women from working in the fields either among Hindus or among Muslims. So a lot of feminist scholars have argued that it is both as we go down the class, that is the lower class women, the gender regulations of mobility and sexuality is less. So the idea of veiling or the restriction on mobility is more as we move up the higher class. So in the villages of Bangladesh, parda usually prevents women from participating directly in the productive activities outside the home. However, in settled villages such as those of West Punjab, women or tenant or subsistence farmer family work in the field, whereas those of the higher class do not. So a lot of data by feminists suggest that as we move up the class, the women's participation in the paid economic role is kind of low. So there is a higher percentage of women working in the lower class and contributing to the economic income of the family than the upper class, where as the status of the family improves, the economic status of the family improves, the women withdraw from paid jobs. So throughout Pakistan, economic marketplaces are reserved for men, and with the exception of only few women for whom it is kind of very compulsory to work in order to survive. So you kind of see only one or two of them in the marketplace, because the cultural belief is that the marketplace is a masculine place which should not be visited by the women. So the idea is that women are participating in paid job, but they remain invisible and their economic contribution is not valued. So the moment that the economic work is invisible and they do not have an independent income, even when they are significantly contributing to family enterprises. Women are also engaged in different kinds of cottage industries and handicrafts, but working from home. So if we look into the modern economy, the invisibility of women's work continues because a large percentage of the informal sector, they absorb women employees, but these are working as home based, So the if we kind of look into the debates on informal workers, we see all the stitching, embroidery, and they are not done within the formal workplace. Why? Because many a time it would add on to the cost of production. The employers have to guarantee the social security benefit to the women, so they avoid that, and as a result a large percentage of women in the informal sector are invisible as home-based workers. Women's participation in the tertiary sector has improved in the recent years. The number has increased, yet a lot of feminist scholars also suggest that they are able to move up to the middle level, the phenomena of glass ceiling, and there are very few who have been able to reach on the top. So when we look into the correlations between the participation in paid job and independence, what is important to understand that how much of economic job and income gives independence, respect and identity to women in South Asia. Her income does not increase in certain way does increase the income of the family, and also improves the standard of living, because additional earning will add on the income of the family. But does it imply that women who are working in the economic sector or contributing to paid jobs have a better control over the resources? Also, does unemployed women get recognition for the work she does in the socialization and education of her children? That implies that we are also trying to understand that if there is a move of women from the private domestic domain to the public sector, does it imply that her burden from the domestic realm declines, or does the burden of doing extra paid job adds on to the women's burden? And in sociological literature, it is referred as double burden, so it is kind of a additional work that women are doing. So one difference in the role and status of women in Southeast Asia and South Asia is that in former, women are known for their vital economic role, that is, they are recognized, whereas in South Asia, women's role as mother and wife is more celebrated. So the cultural value of being a mother, it's celebrated than her working in the in the paid zone. In Southeast Asia, women besides being wives and mothers have always been engaged in income earning. The undertaking of a wide range of tasks has contributed to the economic independence, autonomy and power. In general, women have been integral in the peasant economy. In Malaysia and Indonesia, they are solely responsible for cultivation. The Javanese household women's domains, he has complete control over the strategic resources and takes all household decisions. Women in this society do all domestic work as well, double burden of unpaid domestic work and paid agricultural peasant work. So to conclude, in bilateral society, it is not only the kinship system but also the role of women in economy. It is also the parity and residence pattern that together contributes to the given women a distinct value. Among poor household, women earning give them position of importance, whereas in wealthier family, women income provides material base for acquiring social power. Their position is in contrast to women in South Asia, who may gain bargaining power because of the earning, but the economic role does not fit with kinship system. For reference, it is suggested that you read Leela Dubey, published in 1997, Women and Kinship, Comparative Perspective on Gender in South and Southeast Asia, published by United Nations University Press. And in this lecture, the reference is from Chapter 3, Group Membership and Inheritance. With this, I come to an end of this lecture. Thank you.